not just buying some party line or believing something because you were told to believe it. Certain things resonate with you and certain things don't. My guess is, and I don't know anything about you personally or anything like that, but my guess is before you started this whole podcast thing, there were lots of people who told you, what are you doing? I mean, you're wasting your time and this and that. And can't you get a real job? All those kinds of messages. And there was something inside of you that said, no, I can do this. I want to do this. This is where my passion is. And, I don't care. I'm going to do it. Yeah. Well, it's the same source of that kind of inspiration that's coming from within you that, again, responds positively to other things and gets turned off, to use your words, blocked. A lot of the spiritual process is much like an unfolding, a developing kind of thing, an emergence kind of thing that comes from within. And to me, the best teachers, whatever the subject, it doesn't matter what the subject is, whatever the subject, the best teachers are facilitators. They engage students in such a way that the student themselves, or Taoism, in Chinese Taoism, the mark of a good leader is that when things get done, the people think they did it themselves. And the fact of the matter is they did do it themselves, because that's how it works. And the best teachers have that same relationship with their students. Now, that sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but that's not the usual model that people follow. Teachers know stuff. Students don't know stuff. And what's the job? The job of the teacher is to instill in the student the stuff that they don't know. Right. That's a whole different top-down model that is really antithetical to the whole spiritual development process. And kids get turned off. Middle school students in particular get turned off. And, and it's counterproductive and it leads to all kinds of anxieties and, blah, blah, blah. But if you go into the approach where you have permission to ask questions, when you have permission to find out what resonates and what doesn't resonate, and this makes sense. The Buddha said, be ye lamps unto yourselves. Don't listen to a thing I have to say if it doesn't make sense to you. That's much better than the Western approach of you have to believe this on faith. And if you question this, you're questioning God. And the whole point of God is beyond it's beyond human understanding. And therefore you're an atheist or you're a heretic if you don't follow the party line. That's just not helpful. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't at all. And I think that what you were talking about with that top-down teaching approach, especially when we grow up that way, then we're always looking for someone else to give us the answers, rather than what your book is suggesting is, here's some information, see what resonates with you, and take that, rather than Arthur telling everyone this is the way to believe, because that's absolutely not the tone of your book nor your intention that I know of.
Well, just again, when all those people told you this business of this business of a podcast and whatever is never going to work, it's not practical, et cetera, et cetera. You said, no, I'm going to do this. This is what's important to me. But I got to tell you, most people listen to those external messages.
Yes.
They squash down whatever they're feeling on the inside, and they become neurotic in some way. They become, workaholics or alcoholics and things like that. Alan Watts says that the ideal is calling work play because you enjoy it.
Right.
But most people, and part of the anxiety is not only because of the externals. People want security. People want to feel like they know what's happening, and to acknowledge that we don't have the answers can be unsettling as opposed to exciting. Soren Kierkegaard, which is a great name to drop at a party or something like that. It sounds so cool. But he calls his book Of Fear and Trembling, because when you start confronting these kinds of questions, what's going to happen to me when I die? I mean, I don't even want to think. Jack Benny said, if I can't take it with me, I'm not going. Yeah. So this whole idea of facing the implications of death and all that, people will do all kinds of things to avoid that. Right. It's scary, it's terrifying, and all that stuff. But the common, the lingo now is what you resist persists.
Yeah.
You can squash it down, but it still it stirs the pot underneath. And that's the thing that a book like this allows us to overcome in a healthy, productive, spiritual way.
Right. And you take readers on a journey. You start at the beginning of the book and then you tie it back up at the end. And I won't go into the details of that because I want the listeners to read the book because it's very thought-provoking, very much, like I said, I walked away with it having a completely different outlook on spirituality. But those parts throughout the book, you identify, you use the term divine intelligence. You call it DI in the book. Can you tell us what that means to you?
Well, I think the important thing is what it doesn't mean.
Yeah.
It's vague and intentionally vague. It's interesting in the Bible in Exodus when Moses asks God for a name, God doesn't give him a name. He says, I will be who I will be, or I am who I am. It's not a name, but people being people and the need to label things, they take the acronym of the Hebrew letters, the Yud He Vav He, and, long story short, it became from Yahweh to Jehovah. Mm-hmm. So people, by being people, took what was meant to be amorphous and vague and unclear, because that's the nature of God. They turned it into something clear and definite and that kind of thing. So divine intelligence is simply my way of trying to suggest the mystery of the universe, that it is intelligent, it's not random, right, and it's not malicious.
Right.
But it is unknowable in its essence. So that's the point of the term die. Also, there is this thing, somebody was telling me, the die is also the prefix for double. So there are always different levels of things. So I thought that was cool. It's not true, but it is cool.
Yeah, right. And so, and I was trying to think, because I want to talk about each chapter of the book, but we just simply don't have time for that. And again, I don't want to give the whole book away on this interview, but you talk in the book about free will, personal responsibility, because you ask the readers questions as we progress through the book. And so you ask about free will. So how does, in your experience, how has free will factored in to everything you've learned about spirituality, religion, and how do you think people use their free will today? Use it or don't use it?
Well, everything is a range. So I think people say things like you either have free will or it's determined. And for me, it's self-evident that we have to have at least a degree of free will. Otherwise, the whole question is pointless. I mean,
right.
You ask a question, it sounds, the assumption is that there's an answer and that people can disagree. That automatically assumes free will. The way I like to think about it, I like to play chess. So a B- type player, and the world champion chess player is this guy Magnus Carlsen. Now we sit down and we play a game. He's going to win, no questions asked. But even Magnus Carlsen, the best chess player in the world, can't predict the exact moves I'm going to make before I actually make them. Once I make them, he guides the game to his win. And that's how I have a certain degree of free will. But at the end of the day, what needs to happen will happen. And the Bible does exactly the same way with the story of Joseph. If you look at the story of Joseph, he's born with this ability to interpret dreams. He's going to be wonderful, great, and this and that. And he has a fair amount of hubris and pride. He takes a lot of satisfaction in that and kind of looks down on his brothers and even on his father. Mm-hmm. Well, the next thing you know, his brothers are jealous. They throw him in a pit and sell him into slavery and figure he's going to be dead. So if you go through the story, you find out that he finds himself in prison, in pits and this and that. But he always seems to have opportunities to move up. And at the end of the day, he finds himself in the Pharaoh's household, able to make the kinds of moves to prevent a famine that would destroy Egypt and the whole Middle East. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, they get reunited with the brothers, and the brothers are scared to death. They're stunned to find out that this guy in front of them and all this power is their long-lost brother, Joseph. And Joseph said probably the least known but most important line in the entire Bible. He says to them, don't worry, what you intended for evil, God made for good. In other words, all this stuff that took place of him being sold into slavery and all these kinds of things, fine, you did it. It was your free will. It wasn't nice. I didn't like it. And it's painful, etc., etc. But nothing you could do could subvert the will of God in terms of making sure that whatever you intended, at the end of the day, it came out for good, for me, for Egypt, for you, for everybody. And that's how you balance free will, this whole question of free will, with divine destiny and on all those kinds of things.
Right.
So, I'll leave it at that.
Well, and it's a big topic. And I think there's that, I know for myself, growing up for a period of time, I had some belief that, I don't know, that everything was pre-planned and I had no say in it or no control. It didn't matter what I did because some path was going to happen, whether I liked it or not. Right. And that's a very disempowering way to live. Luckily, I don't believe that today, but I think maybe there are people who do still believe that. They believe that no matter what I do, it doesn't matter. There's some predetermined outcome that I can't control. And I also think sometimes people use God, for example, as an excuse to stay stuck or as something that they're waiting on, and which again, to me is a very disempowering way to live, because there's that part, and you talk about this in the book, about that connecting with the divine intelligence, or whatever the word someone wants to use. It's a meeting of the two. And as humans, we can't just sit around waiting for something to happen and expect that we don't have to take action, right? There's that part where you meet up. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
There's a real cute joke. I remember this guy prays to win the lottery. He wants to win the lottery. He's poor. He's this and that. He can't. He prays and prays and prays. And finally, out of his frustration, he yells at God and says, God, I've been praying for days and weeks and months. Why can't you get me to win the lottery? And all of a sudden you hear this voice, schmuck, buy a ticket.
Right.
So you have to do something, right? You have to do something.
Right. Like what you hear so far? Take what you've learned and invest in yourself with the Create What You Speak Academy. Visit createwhatyouspeak.com to learn more. Now back to the show.
It's very tempting to stay stuck.
Right.
People don't like to call it staying stuck. People are much more comfortable calling themselves victims and passive and things like that, which is basically a cop-out. Shakespeare said that a coward dies 1,000 deaths, but a hero dies but once. There is risk, and risk invariably involves a degree of pain and all this kind of stuff. But I know me personally, and again, I'm no hero in any way, shape, or form of the word. But I do, anytime I'm faced with a difficult choice, I don't, this business of what would Jesus do or all that kind of stuff. I don't do that. But I do what I do is say, okay, Arthur, you're on your deathbed and you're looking back on this scene. At that point, what do you wish you had done or had the guts to do now?
Yeah.
Or, are you going to regret that you didn't do or did do whatever? And I got to tell you, this business of death, which is very complicated, et cetera, nevertheless, take death out of the picture and all the risks and joys and satisfactions of life disappear because nothing really matters. That perspective of shifting the focus from whatever the present choice is to the deathbed will clarify for a lot of people. Do you really want to look back on this moment in time when you had this choice and you turned it down? If the answer is no, then you change your behavior.
Right.
I wouldn't have gone to Singapore with that.
Right. And look where, as a result of taking that leap, right? So the tone I got from your book was, and I think we've touched on this, but giving people the opportunity to be more independent in their thinking about religion / spirituality, not feeling maybe necessarily that they have to be committed to one way to do something or tied to one one religion or whatever the word. I hesitate with the words because I know sometimes that means different things to different people. But how do you think people can start to become